Buckle your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Doug Gottlieb from Fox Sports Radio was on my Sports Deli podcast. And if you listen to him today, he had a take where he said if anyone was doing their job in our industry, that they would have led today with the story of John Calipari, who has won one national championship and sent roughly, I think it was 35 players to the NBA, who, until yesterday, coached at arguably the most historic college basketball program in the history of college basketball. And he accepted the job at the University of Arkansas. And I'm sure it was a mutually acceptable agreement, if you will, because they didn't want him there anymore. He didn't want to stay there anymore. And he bounced. And he went to Arkansas. And so Doug Gottlieb from Fox Sports Radio said that if anybody was doing their job today, the day after the women's national championship game, if people in our industry were doing their job, they would have led with that story. Doug. I don't care how many millions of dollars you make. I don't care that you played at Notre Dame and then Oklahoma State. I am grateful that you came on my show. You have had a lot of wild takes in the past. Your argument that because John Calipari won a national championship and that he's one of the highest paid coaches in college basketball and that he's at one of the most historic programs in the land, that should be the lead story over the women's national championship game that drew more than 24 million people. Men, women, children from all over the United States. Peaked at 24 million. Averaged $18.7 million. Where Dawn Staley won her third. So part of your argument was that a guy who won a national title at Kentucky, who was one of the highest paid coaches in the land, who went from Kentucky to Arkansas, that should be the lead story over the women's national championship, over Caitlin Clark, even though she lost, who has been a transformational player like Steph Curry, like MJ, like Larry, like Magic Johnson, that should be the lead story over Dawn Staley winning her third natty and over Caitlin Clark playing in her last collegiate game in the history of college basketball? Are you out of your mind? Like, literally, are you out of your mind? Like, it is so disrespectful, number one. Number two, the fact that John Calipari and Arkansas announced this the day of the national championship for the women is so dirty. It is so disrespectful. I don't even know where to begin. You couldn't have waited until today when the men's national championship is going on? Don't you think that would have been a little bit more appropriate to try and take away from the magic? And that's what it was. It was magical. That national championship game for the women that peaked at 24 million people watched that game. And it averaged 18.7 million people. Where we saw Caitlin Clark drop 18 in the first quarter until South Carolina locked her up for the rest of the game. And it was still a close game. I cannot believe that he thinks. First of all, Kentucky basketball is so irrelevant right now. Arkansas basketball was relevant a couple of years ago when Musselman, who took the USC job at Southern Cal recently, did a great job a couple of years ago. Arkansas basketball is irrelevant. Arkansas football is irrelevant. Nobody cares about Arkansas basketball or football. And it's no disrespect to them. They got great players. They've had some great coaches. You know, they won a national championship under Nolan Richardson. I think it was 1994. But today, the lead story should be the fact that John Calipari left Kentucky to go to Arkansas? When Kentucky basketball is irrelevant? When John Calipari underachieved and has continued to underachieve? That should be the lead story over Dawn Staley if we're doing our jobs, and Caitlin Clark? Doug Gottlieb? Like, what are you talking about, bro? That might have been the dumbest take I've ever heard you have. The most insulting take. Like, ridiculous. That John Calipari's story going from Kentucky to Arkansas should have been a bigger story, should have been the lead story, according to Doug Gottlieb from Fox Sports Radio. Today, the day after the Women's National Championship game, that saw South Carolina and Dawn Staley win her third national championship, lose all 5 starters from last year, and find a way to win a national championship and go undefeated at 38-0. Where the ratings were at 24 million, more than 24 million people at one point, averaging 18.7 million people. The third consecutive game that Caitlin Clark played in, where on April 1st it was 12.3 million. On April 5th in the semifinals against Connecticut and Paige Buckets, was 14.2 million. And yesterday averaged 18.7 million, peaking at 24 million. An irrelevant John Calipari, irrelevant Kentucky, irrelevant Arkansas should be the lead story. Hey, Doug Gottlieb, what are you talking about, bro? Now, if you had said today's lead story should be the men's national championship game between Connecticut and Purdue, still ridiculous. John Calipari and Kentucky and Arkansas, there's not one coaching change unless Coach K came back to coach. If Coach K came back to coach at Arkansas, or he took one of these other jobs that's open, I could wrap my head around that being a bigger story than Dawn Staley winning her third national championship and Caitlin Clark playing in her last collegiate game and being part of herstory yesterday like we've never seen before in terms of the women's ratings, other than World Cups and Super Bowls and Tiger Woods at one point. I mean, we're talking about a transformational player. We are talking about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to watch Caitlin Clark play in her second consecutive national championship game. The only time you'll ever get to watch her. And we're going to lead with John Calipari going from Kentucky, the underachieving used car salesman, going from Kentucky to Arkansas. He's only won one national championship. He's underachieved as much as Aaron Rodgers. Talking about he's one of the best ever. He's underachieved. John Calipari's underachieved. Is he a great coach? I don't know. I mean, he's okay. I don't consider him one of the greats. But to say it is so insulting, the fact that they announced this the day of the national championship game for the women, and to say that we should be leading with this story today is absurd. It is dirty. It's absurd. And Doug Gottlieb, you should know better. You're a girl dad. It's a ridiculous take. He's wrong, and it's absurd. Is it a big story? I guess. Does anyone care about John Calipari going from Kentucky to Arkansas? Like, really, does anyone care? I literally could care less. I do not care. I don't care if the women's national championship wasn't yesterday. I think the lead story should be that the men's game is today before John Calipari going from Kentucky to Arkansas. That's how little I care about John Calipari. Let me know what you think in the comments. This is Hootie Hoo from the Sports Daily Podcast. The lead story should have been and was the right one.